gentlemen, welcome to the 17th Annual Spsp Convention. Please welcome your 2016 Convention Chair from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Dr. Keith Payne.
Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to San Diego. I'm honored to welcome you to this year's convention. This year, we have nearly 4,000 attendees here this weekend, making this year's convention the biggest yet. Pulling together a convention of this size takes a lot of work. So I would like to take a moment to thank the many volunteers who have worked throughout the year to make this weekend possible. In particular, I want to give a special thanks to our program co-chairs, Mickey Inslick and Jess Tracy, who have put together a terrific program. The next 2 days pack in a lot of sessions. I would call your attention in particular to the 2 special invited sessions being offered as well. On Friday afternoon, be sure to check out the invited session on big data, and on Saturday, the invited session on big questions in evolutionary science. This weekend also kicks off our inaugural celebration of our first Spsp Legacy in honor of Walter Mischel. The Legacy program is designed to honor a luminary in the field with lasting influence. There will be a symposium on Saturday honoring Walter's work, and you'll also notice as you see many of the posters in the poster hall, many of them have badges on the side indicating that that work was influenced by Walter Mischel's legacy. Finally, maybe the most important part of an Spsp convention is the ability to connect personally with each other. There are lots of opportunities to do so, starting with this evening's welcoming reception. I want to thank Sage Publishing for sponsoring that reception. There are also several other receptions throughout the weekend, including a diversity reception tomorrow, a social hour for those working in non-academic jobs, and a closing reception on Saturday night. So please enjoy the convention. I look forward to seeing many of you throughout the weekend. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Director of Spsp, Chad Rummel.
Thank you. It's true, I do exist. I am more than an email address, I promise. Good evening and welcome to San Diego. I've been here for a few days. We had to fly out ahead of that DC blizzard, so I've had the unfortunate experience of being here in the sun for 4 days. The things I do for you guys, I tell you. I want to start by thanking Keith Payne and the entire convention committee who have worked all year long on this particular convention and are already working on next year's convention in San Antonio. Outside of the convention, it's been a very exciting year at SPS, but we've launched many new programs, including our new small grants program, which you'll hear more about this weekend, and our summer program for undergraduate research, which just launched applications. So all the undergrads in the room, be sure to check out our summer program for undergraduate research. In addition, a strategic planning task force led by Dr. Rich Petty is meeting this weekend to kick off a 12-month strategic planning process to ensure that we continue to develop in a focused and positive way for the entire field of personality and social psychology. In the last year, we've increased our outreach to the public and our outreach to Capitol Hill. We've seen an increase in membership, and we've topped 7,000 members of SPSP. That is worth applause right there. We've launched our new membership communities and several special interest groups, and we've created 4 new endowments to support the future of SPSP. This is a very exciting time to be a part of the organization, and I'm happy to be here with you all. I'd also like to call your attention to a few new additions to the convention this year. As Keith mentioned, there are many chances throughout the weekend to strike up conversations with your colleagues. And at some point, you're going to find yourself sitting there saying, man, this is a really good conversation. This is bigger than just the two of us talking about it. If you have that, there's a way to expand it, and it's called pop-up programming. If you have a topic you'd like to promote and you'd like to gather people around to talk about it, come to the registration desk and reserve a space. We'll promote the conversation, we'll promote the session, and we'll invite others to join you and talk about it in one of our pop-up rooms. This concept of dynamic programming is going to encourage ongoing, spontaneous conversation throughout the convention, and I hope you take advantage of it. If you've already downloaded the mobile app, you'll be able to see those newly created pop-up sessions as they're created, and we already have 3 or 4 that were launched today, so look forward to those. The mobile app is also a searchable program with links to full abstracts. You can search by keyword, and you can even create your own schedule. And finally, one of the newest additions to the convention that I'm most excited about is our Q&A contest. If you've ever seen the TV show Shark Tank, this is kind of a spoof of that, but it also doubles as a small grant contest. 3 finalists have already undergone rigorous review, and they've been selected to compete on stage against judges who are going to be reviewing their grants. At the end, one winner will walk away with $5,000 to fund their research. So be sure to join us tomorrow in this room for lunch to watch Q&A. And to close, I want to give one last special shout out to the central office staff who has been here working already for the last few days. If you see a member of our staff in a blue polo, please give them a thank you for all their work they've been doing to make this a successful convention. I wish you all a great convention, and I look forward to networking with many of you at the events this weekend. Thank you.
It's now time to welcome to the stage your 2016 Spsp President. From the University of Southern California, please welcome Dr. Wendy Wood.
Hi there. It's an honor to welcome each of you to San Diego, and this is my home state of California. I, too, can't give enough thanks to all of the volunteers, committees, speakers, and presenters who are generously giving of their time to make this happen. For those of us who come every year, this is a real highlight, and so I thank everyone for that. And it's true that many of us do come every year. In fact, there are several dozen people here this weekend who have attended all 17 of the conventions, dating back to the first in Nashville. So if you're one of those people who has attended all 17, can you stand now so that we can recognize you? Okay, that's pretty wonderful. In addition to our regular attendees, more than 1,000 folks here are attending their first Spsp convention. So if this is your first time attending Spsp, can you stand now so that we recognize you? These are clearly 2 groups that need to get together. We welcome you, and I encourage you to reach out if you need help navigating the convention if you're one of the new folks. I'm sure that for many of you, this will be the start of an annual tradition. So stepping into the role of president, there's a lot ahead. And moving an organization forward is much easier if you are coming on the heels of an excellent past president like Mark Leary. Mark, would you please join me on the stage? Mark, your leadership over the year, and specifically your initiatives to reach out and support those of us whose primary commitment is teaching, has made its mark on Spsp. And I'd like to thank you for all of these efforts with this plaque. Okay, so in the spirit of recognizing achievements, I'd like Mark to stay on stage and help me present the 2015 Spsp Award winners as we recognize excellence in personality and social psychology. But we have to thank also the many award panels and nomination and selection panels that spent countless hours selecting the best of the field in tonight's recipients. I'd also like to send a special thank you to the board of the Foundation for Personality and Social Psychology, who've worked over the years to endow several of tonight's awards, and for Sage Publications for sponsoring the award ceremony and providing the champagne to help us mark this occasion. The first awards of the night are the Student Publication Awards. Spsp recognizes excellence in student research published in our 3 journals. This year's winners are Jian Chao, Alyssa Fu, Samantha Heintzelman, and Bo M. Winogard, who couldn't join us today, but his co-author, Tanya Reynolds, will be accepting on his behalf. Congratulations, Student Award winners. Now I'd like to invite Danielle Bath from SAGE and Harry Reese from the Spsp Foundation to join me in presenting the next awards, which are the 2016 Young Scholar Awards. Recipients of these awards are between 3 and 7 years into their first academic position, and they're already setting themselves apart from their peers with cutting-edge research. This year's winners are Adam Waits, who could not join us today, Cheryl Waxlack, Jonathan Freeman, Ulrich Orth, and Webke Blydorn. Congratulations to this year's Sage Young Scholars and their tremendous achievements. Okay, the Media Award for Excellence in Science Journalism honors a member of the media for outstanding coverage of personality and social psychology as a field. This year's award goes to Ezra Klein. His thought-provoking analysis of political events and current news incorporates social and personality psychology like few other journalists, and his social media activities promote our findings to top policymakers, advocates, and commentators. Unfortunately, due to prior commitments, he could not join us today, but we recognize him for his work. The Spsp Book Prize for the promotion of social and personality science honors a book written by a psychologist that promotes understanding of personality and social psychology science to the general public. This year's award is presented to Nicholas Epley for his book Mindwise. Mindwise explores why people care about what other people think by calling on top-of-the-line social and personality research and examples from politics, celebrities, and Epley's own life. Congratulations, Nick. Our next award honors the most outstanding and innovative contribution to social and personality psychology over the past year. In 2015, there were actually two works that were deserving of the Daniel M. Wegner Theoretical Innovation Prize. The first goes to Michael Inslicht, Brandon Schmeichel, and Neil McCrae for their 2015 article entitled Why Self-Control Seems But May Not Be Limited. Please join me in congratulating Mickey, Brandon, and Neil. The second Wegner Theoretical Innovation Prize goes to Brock Bastian, Jolanda Jetten, Matthew Hornsey, and Sri Lenkis, the three of which could not join us today, for their 2014 article entitled The Positive Consequences of Pain. Congratulations to Brock, Jolanda, Matthew, and Siri. The Methodological Innovation Award was established to recognize an individual who has made significant and sustained contributions to novel and innovative methods in our field. The 2015 Methodological Innovation Award goes to Robert Rosenthal. In recognition of his methodological contributions to experimenter bias, nonverbal communication, statistical methods, and meta-analysis. Congratulations to Bob, who couldn't join us today. Our next award is endowed by the Foundation for Personality and Social Psychology through a generous contribution from Robert Cialdini. The Cialdini Award is given to the author of a publication whose work uses field methods to demonstrate relevance to a group or groups outside of our field. The 2015 winning work is Breaking the Cycle of Mistrust: Wise Interventions to Provide Critical Feedback Across the Racial Divide. And this is presented to David Scott Yeager, Valerie Purdue Vons, Julio Garcia, Nancy Apfel, Patty Brustowski, Allison Master, William Hessert, Matthew Williams, and Jeffrey Cohen. They tested 2 theory-driven interventions to reduce mistrust and thereby enhance the effectiveness of teacher feedback and student performance. Jeff Cohen will be accepting this plaque on their behalf. We'll keep it for him. The Distinguished Scholar Award honors an individual who has made distinctively valuable research contributions across his or her career that expand the core of social and personality research. The 2015 Distinguished Scholar is Phil Shaver. Phil has been one of the most productive and talented contributors to research on personality, emotion, and relationships in recent decades. His deep knowledge of different areas and integrative mind have enabled him to translate philosophical, sociological, and political ideas into psychological terms and scientific tests. Congratulations, Phil. The Embody Award for Mentoring Excellence honors a personality or social psychologist who has demonstrated a career-long commitment to fostering the professional and intellectual development of students and early career researchers. The 2015 Nalani Embody Award goes to Mark Zana. He's been a role model and inspiration for generations of students. Congratulations to Mark, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. The Carol and Ed Diener Awards in Personality Psychology and Social Psychology are generously endowed by contributions from Carol and Ed Diener. Carol and Ed are here with us today, and we thank you. These awards recognize 2 scholars whose work substantially adds to the body of knowledge in our field. The 2015 Award in Personality Psychology goes to William Fleeson in recognition of thoughtful contributions to both theory and methodology that have been inspirational and instructive for the field of personality. Congratulations, Will. The 2015 Carol and Ed Diener Award in Social Psychology goes to Michelle Gelfand. Michelle's work on the strength of cultural norms and cultural values, negotiation, conflict, revenge, and forgiveness is deeply interdisciplinary and incorporates a variety of methods ranging from behavioral lab studies to fieldwork, computational methods, and neuroscience. Join me in congratulating Michelle. The Career Contribution Award recognizes distinguished scholarly contributions across long and productive careers of individuals who have made major theoretical and/or empirical contributions to the field. There are 2 winners of Career Contribution Awards this year. The first is Harry Reese. Harry has made major contributions to the development of relationship science. including understanding the basic processes that create good relationships, the importance of close relationships to well-being, and the study of daily life. Congratulations, Harry. The second winner of the Career Contribution Award is Jakob Trope, whose important contributions to social and personality psychology highlight how people think about their lives. Most recently, his work on construal level theory outlines the consequences of transcending the present to mentally traverse temporal, spatial, and social distance. Congratulations, Jakob. Our next award was created and endowed by generous donations in the name of Donald Campbell. The Donald T. Campbell Award recognizes exceptional scholarly achievement and ongoing sustained excellence in research in social psychology. The Campbell Award in 2015 goes to Jennifer Crocker and Brenda Major. Their collaborative theoretical and empirical research on social stigma and mental health changed the way we understand stigmatized groups. Join me in congratulating Jenny and Brenda. The Jack Block Award is endowed in honor of Jack and recognizes a scholar for his or her research accomplishment in personality psychology. The 2015 Jack Block Award winner is David Watson. His influential research has identified important structural dimensions of personality, mood, and psychopathology, and has examined how personality traits relate to clinical disorders. Congratulations, David. The next award is the Award for Distinguished Service on behalf of personality and social psychology. The winner this year is Laura King. Through her leadership, we now have a better sense of the bonds that social and personality share with developmental, clinical, evolutionary, and health psychology. Her research on the ways people find meaning in their lives has significant intellectual and personal effect on people, both within the field and beyond. Congratulations, Laura. Our final award of the evening honors an individual who has served our society in an extraordinary way. The 2015 Award for Distinguished Service is presented to Susie Schrader, who served as the first Chief Financial Officer in its history. With deep gratitude for her many and important contributions, and we can't say enough about the work that she has done for this organization, we present Susie Schrader with the 2015 Award for Distinguished Service. Okay, So the success of our field, we're looking pretty good, is evident from all of these important accomplishments of the various awardees. So to give them one last congratulations, please join me in raising your glass of champagne, if it's not empty, to celebrate these honors. Congratulations. Okay. On to the next part of this program. This past fall, the whole field of personality and social psychology received significant recognition. And that came in the form of President Obama's executive order that required government agencies to use behavioral science insights to better serve the American people. In his words, in this executive order, our research findings about how people make decisions and act on them can be used to design better government policies. And many people have recognized this as a big win for our field, as is the newly created Social and Behavioral Sciences team to advise the White House, and you sometimes hear this referred to as the Nudge Brigade. If you've read their 2015 annual report, you can't help but get enthused about the potential for application of the work we do. The team uses randomized control trials, gold standard methods in our discipline, to reduce the behavioral barriers to engagement with federal programs. And they have already documented some significant effects of their work, including more students going to college, better managing student loans, more veterans taking advantage of education and career counseling, and more service members now saving for retirement. But everybody here probably doesn't embrace this policy initiative, and of course they shouldn't. We're a very broad field with strong themes of basic research, as well as great promise for application. And contributing to policy really requires basic researchers to think somewhat differently about the questions we're addressing and the way we're pursuing research. Tonight, I invited 3 distinguished researchers and thinkers to talk about their views on policy and behavioral science, how we as a field are contributing currently to policy initiatives, as well as what we might do better. So I'm going to invite each of them up to the stage, and then I've asked each of them to give a brief 10-minute talk giving their views of where the field is at right now and how we might move forward. At the end of that, we'll open it up for discussion, and you'll have an opportunity to talk with these people about these issues. So let me first welcome up Craig Fox, who is Professor of Management at the University of California in Los Angeles. His research is on behavioral decision theory, especially the way people make decisions under risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And along with Sim Sitkin, he's the founding editor of the journal Behavioral Science and Policy, as well as a founder of the Spsp Society. Welcome, Fred. We also have Richard Thaler, who is a professor of behavioral science and economics at the University of Chicago. His work addresses behavioral economics and finance, as well as the psychology of decision-making. You may know him as the co-author of the best-selling book Nudge, and more recently, he has expanded his celebrity status to Hollywood. So if you go see The Big Short, you'll get to see Richard in action. Bethany Teachman is our third speaker. She is a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia. She runs the program for Anxiety, Cognition, and Treatment Lab, and her research addresses the cognitive processes that contribute to anxiety disorders. Okay, I have asked Bethany to speak first on her experiences with a recent journal publication providing memos to the White House from us as psychological advisors. Bethany.
Do we have the clicker? Thank you. First, I want to thank Wendy for putting together this symposium. It's a great opportunity, and we're excited to share some of the work we did in the special issue in Perspectives on Psychological Science that was co-edited by myself, Bobby Spellman, and Mike Norton. And the impetus for doing this special issue came from a sense that psychology and our findings really should be used to inform so many of the big problems that are facing society. And yet a sense of frustration among many of us that we weren't always having the impact that we hoped to have. And so what we wanted to do with the special issue was bring together researchers and really showcase their work to demonstrate the breadth of ways that psychology could inform policy, not just in one or two of the domains that are commonly talked about, but really show the diversity and potential for impact. So we put out a really broad call. We said, imagine serving on a new Council of Psychological Advisors, on which you had the chance to send memos to the President offering insights from the best research in psychological science to help solve specific pressing problems facing society. And we asked people to submit abstracts and said that those who were selected would then be invited to submit a 1,500-word memo. Short. The reason we went for such a short format is that we really wanted to push researchers to distill their great ideas down to the key, concise, take-home messages. Simple, clear demonstrations of how psychological research could inform policy that would be easy to digest and hopefully therefore widely read. We were overwhelmed by the response. So you guys have a lot of ideas about how psychology can inform policy. So we thought we might get about 50 submissions. We received 222 submissions involving over 400 different authors, many who are in this room today. The final 12 that we selected were chosen to represent a broad array of topics. We received tons of submissions on health and education, and those are certainly well represented. But as you'll see, there was a real diversity of topics that were submitted. We picked papers that showcased research that was ready to be applied. And this is an issue I hope we'll talk about in the Q&A, but what we mean by that is research that wasn't just based on a single finding from one lab, but that represented a body of research that we thought was robust and had really demonstrated reliability. And we picked papers that we thought would lead to clear policy recommendations. So not just general suggestions that could inform intervention development, but really specific concrete policy recommendations. And we selected papers that would showcase a variety of approaches. So nudges, education initiatives, as well as regulation and mandates. And we did something that was a little bit unusual. So because we were so impressed by the variety of submissions that we received, and also because we had a lot of submissions that had some overlap, we decided to try something a little bit different. And for most of the papers, we actually paired together different research groups and asked them to work together, even though they had done independent submissions. The idea was that if the groups could work together, they would have to come to consensus on what were the very most important ideas that should get through, what was the best psychological science that could inform policy. So I don't have time, unfortunately, to tell you about all 12 of the submissions, but I want to give you a brief sampling of what the different topics were that were covered, and then also a little taste of how people were using psychological science to inform their policy suggestions. So in the area of health, we had a paper that looked at trying to change unhealthy habits, be it exercise or eating. A paper that tried to address the obesity epidemic. A paper that tried to deal with the problems of changes in memory as people age and how to manage those normal age-related changes. A paper that tried to address the sleep crisis, the fact that most of us in this room are probably pretty tired right now and not getting enough sleep. And a paper that tried to address problems of risk-taking in adolescence. So Larry Steinberg, for instance, talked about the research on adolescent brain development and the rather mixed findings on educational interventions. And he said that given this research, perhaps we should not be focusing so much on trying to change adolescents' behavior, but trying to change the context in which adolescents behave. So could we reduce their exposure to risk factors and to temptations at this critical period? And from this thinking, suggested policy recommendations such as the idea that we should change the legal age of purchase for tobacco up to 21, so that we would have less exposure during that critical period of risk. In the area of education, we had a paper that tried to help address the fact that it was challenging for parents to effectively promote early childhood education at home, and a paper that tried to address gaps in school achievement. So Anita Rattan's work, along with her co-authors, showcased Carol Dweck and others' work on growth and belonging mindsets. The idea that intelligence could be improved over time with effort, and the importance of feeling like you belonged in your academic setting, and how having these growth and belonging mindsets can lower racial, gender, and social class gaps and increase student motivation and grades. Building from this important body of research, they proposed a series of exciting policy recommendations, including ways to teach academic mindsets during other school programming. We also had papers that tried to address dysfunction of various forms in our institutions and organizations. So trying to address lack of diversity and the problems associated with group homogeneity, and trying to address fraud and unethical behavior. So building on the research, showing that if we can make morality salient at just the right moment, just when you're feeling tempted, and make it a lot harder to justify dishonesty, it can go a long way to reducing unethical behavior. So they proposed many different policy recommendations, such as changes to tax returns, and the idea of putting moral reminders on tax returns, very strategically placed. So at just the right time, it would make salient the real costs of not reporting income. Who are the victims? What are the consequences? And what are the benefits if you do, in fact, report income? Finally, we had a set of papers that proposed ways we could secure our future more effectively, be that improving national intelligence estimates, trying to get people more mobilized to take action on climate change, or address consumer debt. So Hal Hirschfield and his colleagues talked about the ways that we're actually pretty bad at predicting our income and predicting our future spending.
And moreover, if we get a windfall gain, as opposed to something we classify as income, we're going to spend it pretty quickly. And so as a result of this research, they propose that we shouldn't get our tax refund in one lump sum. We should actually get it in 12 separate payments, and it would dramatically change the ways that we use that money. So I've just given you a small taste of the kinds of work that people contributed to the special issue, but I hope you'll take time to go and see the papers themselves. We were fortunate to also receive comments from two of the world leaders who think about how do you take behavioral science research and use it to inform policy. So Cass Sunstein is a professor of law, but also the former administrator in the Obama administration of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. David Halpern is the director of the UK's Behavioral Insights team, often talked about as the Nudge Unit. And they had a number of really wonderful comments about these papers and the different ideas in the special issue, and also some recommendations, and I'm just going to share a couple of them with you. Cass pointed out that when we write our papers for academia, we're typically doing it to test a theory, right? We've all gotten comments from reviewers about the importance of work being theoretically driven. When we're doing work to inform policy, Cass argues it should be driven by the problem to be solved. So it may be less important that the idea is innovative or original. What's critical is that it be really effective at addressing a particular problem. And David Halpern talked about the importance of using an experimental approach within government. So not just testing an idea in the lab and then applying it in the field, but really testing the ideas within government. And talked about the many successes that the Behavioral Insight team has had. As one striking example, they wanted to expand representation by ethnic minority members in the police force. And so on the UK police exam, they just added one simple prompt. During the exam, they said, I want you to take a moment and reflect on why joining the police force is important to you as a person and important to your community. That small change changed the pass rate on the exam for ethnic minority applicants from 40% to 60%. What's striking is what a tiny, simple intervention that was. And Cass points out that the best policy suggestions are simple and clear and suitable for actual implementation, preferably in the short term. And that's part of why we went for that memo approach. And this same idea really underpins comments by David Halpern about why it may be that economists have had arguably more impact on policy to date than psychologists. That it can be challenging for psychologists to make those simple, clear, concise claims. And certainly it was a common comment from a reviewer that one of the challenges in the paper was how to take the psychological research and shift it from informing not just general intervention suggestions, so not just the principles that should guide interventions and should guide policy, but what should the specific concrete policy recommendations be? And I think that's because we haven't had a lot of exposure to how to do that typically. It's not often been a part of our training. But there are a lot more opportunities now, and I think this is a really exciting time. So the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team, as Wendy pointed out, provides a lot of ways to get involved. So they offer a fellowship that's both pre-doctoral and postdoctoral. The Association for Psychological Science has paired with the Society for Science of Clinical Psychology. Full disclosure, I'm immediate past president. So we developed a website that would allow psychological scientists who are junior members of the field to get in touch with more senior members who are using their psychological science backgrounds in a real diversity of ways, including informing policy. It's a searchable database where people can try to make a match to find a mentor who's applying psychological skills in unique ways. In addition, I think there's a lot we can do in our training programs. So most of us didn't get training in how to talk to media, how to do advocacy or lobbying work, and it's something that we can introduce into our graduate programs. These are teachable skills. I'm not going to talk about the Behavioral Science and Policy Association because I assume Craig is going to be doing that as a co-founder, but we have all these new avenues now. And my favorite is stealing good ideas. So I'm not actually a social psychologist, I'm a clinical psychologist. And I think there's some exciting ideas from clinical psychology, particularly in the UK, that can serve as a model for us to pay attention to. So for example, David Clark is a psychologist in the United Kingdom, and he has partnered with economists there to implement a really amazing program called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. And with this program, they have really transformed how mental health services are delivered in the UK. They convinced the government to support training of thousands and thousands of mental health providers to provide the treatments that have the best available research support. That's a huge issue in the clinical field. It means no longer do you go to a therapist and get whatever type of therapy that therapist wants to do. You get the therapy that's based on the best research evidence to be effective. And it's really had transformative effects on clinical outcomes. Part of the way they were able to do this was the ways that they use data. So the NICE guidelines in the UK are a set of extremely systematic, interdisciplinary, well-established guidelines about what treatments are effective. It served as an excellent base to have those conversations with policymakers in a really compelling way about what was likely to be effective. That was paired with an incredible commitment to monitoring outcomes. So gathering data right from day one about the effectiveness of the approaches they were trying. And as a result, they were very well positioned to do cost-benefit analyses and to do work that was self-correcting, to learn from the results of one region that was underperforming relative to another that was performing effectively, and really encourage best practices in a really iterative way. And I think this is a really exciting time to be doing this work. So I want to close with a comment from David Halpern, who says that an ever-growing number of countries are establishing capabilities like that of the Behavioral Insights team that have a place in decision-making, are championing the experimental approach, and are reading your work. Thank you, and keep pushing at that door. And with that, I want to thank you as well.
We're getting a bit of feedback up here on the stage. I don't know if you can turn off this mic or the monitors. It's a little bit echoey here. All right. Well, let me begin with a confession. I have a confession to make, and that is that I'm like most of you. I'm an experimental psychologist by training who wants to make a difference in the world. And shortly after receiving tenure, one way that I tried to do that as an act of personal conviction is I put together a group of behavioral scientists to provide some consulting to politicians and some political parties. A very impressive group of people participated in all that. It was a very heady and educational experience, but as that wound down, I found that I was more passionate about the idea of bringing our science into policy and practice than I was in helping one party or one politician. And I've learned a few things along the way that I'd like to share with you about how we might better bridge the divide between social science and policy. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And to begin with, I think we need to start where the policymakers are. And the policymakers are grounded in a view of the world that's firmly entrenched in neoclassical economic theory. They have this view in the world of that a representative actor, representative individual is this species known as Homo economicus, that people tend to, and institutions tend to maximize their self-interest. As a result, the key policy tools that are available to policymakers who have this worldview are three. The first is incentives, of course. There you can have tax incentives, for instance, or financial penalties. The second is information, public service campaigns, for instance, or mandates of disclosures and so forth. And the third is regulation, that you can mandate that people or organizations behave in a certain way, which an economist would say is a form of incentive if it's followed by legal sanctions or penalties. Of course, the people in this room know that this species of individual, Homo economicus, is not particularly realistic. We have decades of research showing, in fact, that we're not quite so selfish and self-interested as all that. We're actually very social animals, and we're not quite as able to maximize as all that. We have distinct limitations to our ability to process information, remember things, and so forth. That a more realistic, more representative agent perhaps might look more like this. A species we might refer to as Homo economicus. But as such, that means that we have actually an expanded tool set that we can offer to policymakers. In addition to the primary tools just mentioned, we can work on incentives that actually have a behavioral flavor to them. For instance, in my discipline of decision making, we know that people tend to overweight low probabilities, and therefore lottery incentives, for instance, can be more powerful dollar for dollar than straight financial incentives. We know that losses loom larger than gains. In addition, people are, as I say, social animals. We care about belonging and affiliation, and therefore there's a strong incentive that people have, for instance, to adhere to descriptive social norms and injunctive social norms, we're responsive to social accountability and so forth. Secondly, with respect to information, it's not just the content of the information that matters. We know that the framing of the information, the format of the information, the frequency with which feedback is provided can be very influential in how people, for instance, construe the situation they're in and respond to the situation they're in and behave. And so having some awareness of the psychology can be very important and provide some powerful new tools for policy making. And finally, we don't necessarily have to be so strong and firm and paternalistic in regulating particular kinds of behaviors, but as Thaler and Sunstein observed, we can use a softer form of paternalism, which has been come to known as nudging, which really is rooted in old social psychology of Lewinian tension systems. If you want to promote behavior, you facilitate that behavior, you make it easier, you make it more accessible, or you present certain frictions in the environment to discourage the kind of behavior that you don't want. We know that those kinds of very subtle cues can be sometimes equally or more powerful than formal incentives. Well, as was mentioned by Bethany, there's an increasing supply of really relevant and applicable and practical social science research that's coming out. And in fact, there's never been a better time, frankly, from a supply side at least, for us to offer our advice to policymakers in addition to the excellent examples that were provided in the last presentation. I mean, here's just a sampling of some recent popular versions of real social science that's available and of interest, I think, to practitioners and policymakers. On the other side, on the demand side, and partly due to this, there's never been more interest among policymakers and practitioners in our science. Of course, you've heard about the nudge unit in the UK and the social and behavioral sciences team here. These kinds of units are sprouting up all over the world, in Canada, in Germany, in Australia, and Singapore, and so forth. The World Bank has a nudge unit now. The UN is talking about it. A number of for-profit organizations also are hiring behavioral scientists and starting to consume, more than ever before, our science. Nevertheless, I would argue that there's a stubborn divide that exists between behavioral scientists and policymakers, that we still need to work hard and think hard about how we're going to bridge that divide. First of all, in our science, we have incentives to publish in theory journals and advance the theory and really understand the theoretical content of what it is that we're researching. And as a result, a lot of the new research that's appearing in those scientific journals is not particularly accessible and not particularly actionable to policymakers, and therefore virtually irrelevant to them, from their standpoint anyway. Secondly, when we try to provide advice in our articles to policymakers and practitioners, we often do so as a few paragraphs in a discussion section of a scientific paper, in so doing showing some of our own ignorance about the context, the institutional context of the relevant policy domain, the degrees of freedom that policymakers have, the political realities, the history of what's been tried and failed and what succeeded and so forth. And as a result, from a policymaker's perspective, if the research reaches them, the advice often comes across as naive. Third, to the extent that behavioral scientists and social scientists want to really school themselves and get connected, they lack opportunities to work in the relevant policy domains. They don't know how to get started. They're not connected. And as for the policymakers, to the extent that they consume our research and want to run randomized controlled trials, for instance, they lack the experience and they may miss some very important nuances of implementation that we're aware of. It's like giving your best theory to your research assistant. You know that if they, without the experience, they're probably going to make some mistakes along the way, and so they still need our help. In addition, I would say that most of us don't know how to reach policymakers, and policymakers, for their own part, even as they become more and more interested in our advice, don't really know how to identify who the experts are. And so this is something that I've been interested in trying to help bridge that divide. Of course, it requires an effort of a lot of individuals and a lot of organizations. And as I say, there's never been a more exciting time to do this than today. Lots of opportunities and lots of organizations and individuals interested in doing it. I will say that one thing we can do if we want to advance our science in policymaking and practice is we can take a few lessons from economists. First of all, one thing that economists have done very successfully traditionally, and one reason why I think they have the monopoly on advice giving traditionally to policymakers, is that they've been successful in building networks of influence. There's a National Bureau of Economic Research that offers advice to policymakers and weighs in on major policy debates. There's a Council of Economic Advisors, there's a Congressional Budget Office, and an Office of Management and Budget in the executive branch that hire economists and rely on their advice. And through those networks, they are connected to the key decision makers and are in positions to influence them, and we need to start doing a little bit of the same. Slowly but surely, we're starting to in some small ways today. Secondly, economists communicate a very simple and accessible story, partly because their model of the world is simple, right? We maximize our self-interests. What could be simpler than that? They're able to communicate something that on its surface seems almost unassailable and tautological, but once you start to peel away at it, we recognize that people violate those assumptions in lots of systematic and predictable ways. Nevertheless, it puts them in an advantageous position. And when we try to offer advice, oftentimes we lace it with lots of complication and nuance and caveats and end up being our own worst enemies sometimes. And so we need to learn to communicate a simple and accessible story. The third thing I think that economists do is that they're all about field tests and field data and external validity. Psychologists, typically, we take external validity as an article of faith, and we're more concerned with internal validity that we can get in the laboratory. And of course, if you're a policymaker wanting to know whether you should follow up on ideas that are being offered to you, you want to make sure that it works in practice in the domain that you're responsible for and you care about. Moreover, economists are really good at quantifying the impact of the interventions that they're proposing. As Danny Kahneman once quipped, economists speak the language of policy, which is money. We're not so good at that. So these are some things that we can take from economists. And let me emphasize again the importance of field research and why I think it's critical, and why I'm pleased to see that there's starting to be a growing movement these days, I think, in social science to value field research. It comes from a story of a friend of some of ours, David Scotty, who's at UC San Diego, who some years ago was approached by the National Academies of Science to they were tasked with trying to increase the rate of organ donation. And so he was named to this panel, and like a lot of us in this room, the first place his mind went was to this picture. How many people have seen this picture and are familiar with this picture? I see, yeah, okay, good proportion of hands going up. Work by Eric Johnson from Columbia and Dan Goldstein on the power of defaults in organ donation. They looked at a number of European countries to see the differences in consent to be an organ donor as a function of whether the default was you're not an organ donor, like in California, you have to put your donor dot on your driver's license to indicate, to opt in to being an organ donor. Other European countries have presumed consent, and you have to indicate that you want to be taken out of the pool, I guess by putting a dot on your driver's license or something like that. Well, most of our grandmothers would have told us that that would make a difference, but they probably wouldn't have predicted it would make this much difference. And as you can see from this picture, I don't know how big it is to you back in the, yeah, it's tiny probably for those of you in the back, but the organ donation rate in those that have an opt-in policy is about 10–15%, and it's near universal in the countries that have an opt-out policy. So he went into to this panel thinking that he was going to trot Eric Johnson in front of the panel, problem solved. Only once the panel started to discuss the problem, he found a few things out. First of all, it's actually been tried before. Some states have tried going from an opt-in to, if not an opt-out, at least a forced choice regime, which all of our scientific studies would suggest should be more effective. Virginia did this, I think, in 2000, for instance. And what happened was it actually backfired. The way it was implemented, and perhaps as a response in part to the sudden change in regime, organ donation rates actually went down, which is something nobody probably in this room, not too many people would have predicted. And so, like a lot of social science that we validate in a lot of different environments and we start to back off our stylized facts, well, sometimes those stylized facts end up not playing out exactly as we expect in a new environment because there are hidden moderators that might expunge or even reverse the impact of the key independent variable. So this is one reason why we need field research in the relevant policy domain. Another thing that he learned as he talked with the people, the other experts in the panel, is that the rate of donation through driver's licenses, for instance, is not actually the biggest problem. There are several different organ procurement organizations around the country, and they have wildly differing rates of successful organ transplantation that can be traced to differences in what kinds of procedures they follow. For instance, in the regions where emergency personnel on the scene of, for instance, an auto accident are told to take the victim to a hospital with a trauma unit, that increases the probability that the organs survive in transplantable condition. If the surgeons can be encouraged to make decisions on a faster basis, that can play a role. If the ER nurses are trained to make more sensitive asks of the family, that can make a big difference. And if we merely brought up the success rate of the lower performing organ procurement organizations to the level of the higher ones, we would substantially solve the problems of organ donation in this country for all organs other than kidneys. So the problem is about identifying the right problem, which once you start getting into the field and talking to experts is really the only way to really understand where the problem is, and it might not be exactly where we think it is ex ante. Finally, there's the problem of calibration. We know, for instance, from Iyengar and Lepper's famous paper that there's choice overload, that if you give people too many options, they're less likely to make a choice. And it's undeniably true that the more options we give people, for instance, of a possible health care plan or prescription drug plan, the more likely you are to serve their interest, to maximize their utility. On the other hand, the trade-off is there can be information overload, and people can fail to sign up for these programs, or they're certainly less likely to choose the right plan for them. And what's right for jams, for instance, may not be right in the context of choosing the right pen, or more to the point, prescription drug plan, or what have you. And that's going to differ as a function of the complexity of the choice. It's going to differ as a function of the education of the target individuals and so forth. And we can only really calibrate our theories. I mean, we know qualitatively too much choice is probably not a good idea, but how to calibrate that to the particular policy application is going to require field work in that particular domain. So in order to really understand this, we need to partner up with some practitioners. We need to take more of our research, I think, into the field. We need to build a community of scholars and practitioners, and fortunately, we're starting to do that with a number of organizations. The one I'm responsible for with Sim Sicken, my former colleague from Duke, is the Behavioral Science and Policy Association, which I encourage you all to check out. And as a matter of fact, our communications director is the blogger-in-chief of Spsp, David Nussbaum, who's going to be doing a pop-up session, David, tomorrow 2 to 3:15 in Sales B, was it? Sales B. And as an added inducement, he's offering free one-year memberships to BSPA. I should have talked him out of that, but anyway, we really encourage you guys to come. You can learn more about BSPA and become a member of the organization. I will tell you that there are already a lot of social psychologists in the organization. It's a highly interdisciplinary group. These are the areas of interest reported by the scientists in the group, and as you can see, social psychology is one of the biggest concerns. We also have cognitive and brain scientists, decision-making management scientists, organization scientists, and so forth. In addition, a wide range of policy interests reported by people, and indeed policymakers and practitioners. So if you come to our conference, for instance, next April 29th in Washington, D.C., that might be one way for you to jumpstart your connection to this kind of a community if you're interested in doing this sort of work. Of course, the other thing that we need is new outlets for publishing this sort of work, and I was very pleased to see the memos to the Council of Behavioral Advisors to the President, which I think is wonderful, and you should all read it, and you should read Cass Sunstein's note as well. I am told that much of that content has already been communicated to the White House Social Behavioral Sciences team, so they're actually starting to read our stuff. In addition, we founded this new journal, BSP, Behavioral Science and Policy. We've now published we're about to publish our second issue. This is the cover of the first issue, it's a co-publication of BSPA and the Brookings Institution, who've been great partners. What's different about it is we have a dual review process. Not only do we have disciplinary scientists evaluating the scientific adequacy and methodological adequacy of papers, but we also have actual policy analysts and some policy makers who are on our editorial board who evaluate papers for current actionability and try and provide feedback to enhance papers in that respect. In addition, these short papers, relatively short papers, to make them readable and accessible to a broad audience that doesn't just include experts and scientists, but also policy people and non-scientists. In order to do that, we professionally edit each of these articles for their readability to a broad audience of non-specialists. So we work very hard to get these papers, and the authors work very hard to get these papers into the right shape that not only maintain scientific integrity, but also they're actionable and readable. We have broad coverage over a lot of different topics, and we have spotlight topics that focus on a particular area of interest. For instance, we have an upcoming one on pre-K education. Here are just the social psychologists on the editorial board. Lots of the most august people in this room have been generous enough with their time to participate, and you'll see if you go to the webpage some equally impressive people in other scientific areas. So we encourage you to submit. Several social psychologists have. For instance, in the first issue, we have Tim Wilson and his colleague, Bob Cialdini and colleagues in the first issue. Michelle Gelfand has a paper in the upcoming issue that's about to go online. There are other ones, Ben Carney and Tom Bradbury. There's some work on implementation intentions and how that can be applied that Mike Norton and others are on. So and there are several that are in the pipeline from people in this room that are coming to the journal, and we welcome more. Frankly, I think that social psychology arguably has the most to offer of all the disciplines to behavioral policy. So we hope to see more from all of you. Let me conclude just by emphasizing one last thing that came out in the previous talk from Bethany, and I think Richard is going to hopefully validate this as well, that we need to, if we want to be successful in bridging the divide, we need to invert our thinking. We typically, as scientists, tend to take a theory-driven approach to policy and practice, right? We develop our best theories, and we think about at the end of the day, how might this be applied? And we write a few paragraphs in our discussion section, and we wonder why policymakers and practitioners aren't paying attention. And in order to be more successful, I think we need to take what Cass Sunstein refers to as a problem-driven approach and a more collaborative approach with policymakers. What does that entail? That entails us not starting with the theory, but starting with the problems. Think about problems that are timely, that are actionable, that are currently of interest to policymakers. School ourselves first on the context, the history. What are the degrees of freedom? What are the institutional constraints? What's been tried? What's worked? What's failed? Before we start to apply our scientific insights. And we have an amazing comparative advantage over policymakers in drawing on the wealth of our knowledge about human behavior and social behavior. In addition, we can't just rely on our instincts. We need to field test in context. And that's going to require some partnering in a lot of cases with policymakers. In addition, we can't just stop there. We need to quantify the impact and the scalability of the interventions if we really want to speak the language of policymakers and learn and focus on, as idealistic as we might be, that good ideas will get an audience. We need to focus on communicating simply and clearly while maintaining our scientific integrity of the work that we're communicating. And not just stop there, as I say. I think that we need to think also, if we really want these ideas to work, about collaborating on the implementation of those ideas to make sure they're tuned and implemented just right, because we're more sensitive to a lot of those nuances than the neophytes are, and how they might play out to the benefit or the detriment of the implementation of the that's being recommended. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Craig. Yeah, maybe before I start on the talk proper, let me just follow up on Craig's last thought and agree that the only way I've seen that psychologists and social scientists generally can help policymakers is to start with the problem rather than your pet theory. And I've been working with the UK Behavioral Insight team since it was started, which was, I guess, 2010. I've probably had 30 meetings with various ministers in various different departments, and every meeting has started the same way, which is, tell us what your problems are, and what are we're here to help. And I listened to one psychologist once at a meeting talk about an experience talking to, yeah, I better not say exactly what it was, but speaking to a group of government workers, and the interaction basically involved a lecture. Like, here are 5 things you ought to know about psychology. That's not going to work. Okay. So here are my prepared remarks, such as they are. Let me start with an old quote. This is from well, I'll read it for you. The economist may attempt to ignore psychology, but it's sheer impossibility for him to ignore human nature. If the economist borrows his conception of man from the psychologist, his constructive work may have some chance of remaining purely economic in character. But if he does not, he will not thereby avoid psychology. Rather, he will force himself to make his own, and it will be bad psychology. You have to forgive the sexist language. This was written in 1918. This was written, some of you may have heard of the John Bates Clark Award, which is given to the best economist under 40. This was written by John Bates Clark's son. Behavioral economics I've always thought of as borrowing good psychology rather than inventing bad psychology. So here's an example of starting with a problem. Years ago, maybe 20 years ago, Fidelity asked me to come and give a talk about how we might help people do a better job of dealing with these newfangled 401k plans that people were just getting used to. And I had some suggestions, and one simple one was, let's just change the default. My answer to almost all the questions that I get asked by policymakers is, we want to help people do something, make it easy. Now, to an economist, the default, whether you have to check a box yes or no, is an irrelevant factor. In my recent book, I called it a supposedly irrelevant factor, and I've spent the last 40 years studying supposedly irrelevant factors. Let me show you how important supposedly irrelevant factors can be. And as you'll see, we won't need to do any statistical tests. So these are the number of people who participate in their 401k plan. The red bars are the ones that have been automatically enrolled, and the blue bars are the ones who have to get around and do something about it. And the various categories on this chart are by income. And you can see that the poor have the greatest difficulty joining the plans if they have to do it themselves. The rich typically figure it out. But if you automatically enroll, you get 90% of the people in, no matter what their income level is. Here's the same data broken down instead of income by age. Again, older folks tend to get this figured out, but everybody gets it figured out if you make it easy. Now, I don't have slides about this, but in listening to the other two talks, I thought it might make sense to talk about a little follow-up to this, which is, this was the first important step in changing 401k plans. Now, about half, or a little more than half, of large 401k plans use automatic enrollment. But the problem is that they typically enroll people at too low of a level. And there's a long story you can read in my book as to how that happened. It's sort of an accidental story of anchoring and adjustment. I'll give you the short version of the story, which is a guy in the Treasury Department, in response to a request from me for an advisory letter telling companies it was okay to use this idea of automatic enrollment. He wrote a letter, and it's typical in such letters to give an example. And so he gave an example. Suppose a company automatically enrolls its workers at a 3% saving rate. Well, now I would say 80 to 90% of companies have 3% as their initial saving rate. There's no one thinks that's a good number, an appropriate number. It just happened to be a number a guy called Mark wrote in a memo. He's written 5 memos since trying to undo that damage, but there we have it. So I started to think about, okay, how can we solve this problem? And I said, well, let's think about what are the things that prevent people from saving. Why don't they save more? Well, one is self-control problems. Although I now hear it's been proven that our self-controls are unlimited. So I may have to rethink everything I've learned in the last 40 years. But anyway, so self-control is one problem we need to think about. Another, loss aversion. People hate to have their pay go down. And the third thing is about self-control, which is we all have more self-control in the future, like next month. Certainly not tonight at dinner. So I tried to create a way that would overcome these problems, and along with my former student, Shlomo Ben-Artzi, we invented something we called Save More Tomorrow, where people were invited. This isn't automatic. They were invited to join a plan where their contributions would get increased every time they got a raise. Now, in the first company that took us about 5 years to get a company to try this. And the first company that did, saving rates tripled. Now, again, now about half the large companies in the country use this idea. And my friend Danny Kahneman says that I use first grade psychology. And in fact, he says that's even an exaggeration. So there's no fancy psychology going on here. It's just sort of common sense. And you guys have more common sense than economists. So we can't trust economists to do everything. As Craig mentioned, there's a boom in so-called nudge units around the world. The first one was the one David Halpern started, David Cameron started in the UK. Interestingly, it's a conservative government. Of course, Barack Obama had his executive order last fall. And as Craig mentioned, there are countries all over the world doing this. The World Bank wrote a report recently, maybe a year ago, and they said there were 50 nudge units, 50 countries that had some sort of behavioral insight team around the world. And there are now many, we have one in Chicago, so there are many cities. The Behavioral Insight Team actually has a grant from the Bloomberg Foundation to create behavioral insight teams in mid-sized cities around the country. So the opportunities to get involved are limitless. But I would say, based on my knowledge of what the teams have been doing so far, the number of psychologists whose work has been used is minuscule. That most people are like me, they're doing first grade psychology. There's a lot of psychology out there. You guys know a lot of stuff. Get busy. You know, this is the first time I've been to Spsp proper. I was at a pre-conference once, and you know, I didn't know you guys had so many awards. So you know, with all these award winners, you know, you have a lot to offer. So why have psychologists not gotten involved? One answer that I hear is, well, we want to keep psychology pure. We want papers to be theory-driven. We don't want to just do data mining. My answer to that is, well, if so, then you're going to be purely irrelevant. And your work is too important to stick to the lab. The second is, for some reason, Danny and I have talked about this for 30 years or so, and neither of us understand exactly why this is, but applied research has just never gotten the respect in psychology that it has in economics. I mean, Craig made a slight misstatement. He mentioned the National Bureau of Economic Research and how they issue policy papers. That's actually not true. They're forbidden from making policy statements. What's true is they churn out hundreds of papers every year that people who set policy read, and they're policy relevant, but no NBER working paper can make a policy recommendation. So if you look down all the economists that have won Nobel Prizes and various other awards, many of them are doing what looks like very applied research. And there was a period in our profession where people who did pure theory were the exalted, but I think that period has passed. But even during that period, applied research has always been held in high regard in economics, and it's up to you to change that if you want the field to be relevant. What that means is papers that might get applied to something have to be published, and not just in Craig's journal. So we need more opportunities to publish in mainstream journals. Probably most of you have read Bob Cialdini's sort of retirement letter from the profession. And if you haven't read it, I suggest you dig it up and read it again. And what I would say is these are self-imposed constraints. There's no reason why you have to limit yourselves to three-way interactions, right? You know, there's some really interesting main effects. Now, this is my closing slide. And the problems that we face they're all behavioral. And if you guys aren't going to answer them, who is? So you can make this list up yourselves. Now, I got an email from Spsp, maybe it was from Wendy, reminding me that we have a water shortage in California. The American Economic Association met in San Francisco about a month ago, and I can tell you no email got sent. Now, maybe that's my fault because I was, at that time, the president of the American. But I can tell you no email like that has ever been sent. So it's not that economists care more about policy than psychologists. I think it's probably the other way around. But I think psychologists have kind of said, well, yeah, we care deeply about policy and we're scared to death of Donald Trump, but then that's one part of our life, and then we've got our research, and that's another part of our life. And I'm saying if you care about the first part, then you ought to be willing to care about it in the second part. Okay, let me stop there, and we'll open it up to all of you.
Okay, that was a great session. Thank you so much, all three of you. I think that was very informative. I'd like to ask one question that several of you touched on, but I think is of real importance for some people in this audience. And that is, if you want to get involved in policy, and you are a graduate student in social psychology, or you're someone who's recently graduated, what kind of training do you need? There are opportunities that we have in the field now, the postdocs and the research fellow positions, potentially with the behavioral, the social and behavioral sciences advisory team that Maya Shankar runs. What else can people do to tailor their experience to enter the policy realm?
Well, I don't think it's as much tools as it is interest and willingness to get your hands dirty. Yeah, it would be good to know something about how to run field experiments, but lots of people know how to run field experiments. And, you know, I think it would be a good idea for psychology PhD programs to include a course that teaches those methods. But you know, most of the research done in these units are done by teams, and there's often a specialist that can help design the field experiments. And what I would say is this kind of work takes time. And you know, I'm not sure that I would encourage, say, a second-year assistant professor to say, okay, I'm going to go do this. Not with the usual short tenure clocks. Because, like I said, when Benartzi and I came up with the idea for Save More Tomorrow, we waited 4 years to find somebody who would try it, right? It was good that neither of us were counting on that for tenure. But I think if graduate students getting interested, there's a time path that can work. It would almost certainly have to include a postdoc, but it doesn't have to be with Maya Shankar. You know, it could be a postdoc at an academic institution. You know, the paper that won one of your prizes that Jeff Cohen was on. I mean, that's a good example of the kind of research. You noticed there were a lot of authors there.
Yeah.
So, and I'm guessing that not all of them knew the ins and outs of running a field experiment, but they all probably learned. The other thing I will say is field experiments are risky.
Well, it should be
so many things can go wrong.
So it should be a part of your portfolio. It shouldn't be the entire portfolio.
Well, you know, I mean, there will be people who decide to do that. God bless them. But I think the thing to start is with a passion for a problem. Okay. And then there will be some aspect of that problem that there will be, you know, if we draw the Venn diagram of the problem you're passionate about and the psychology you know about, get into that intersection.
I think it's also the case that as mentors, we can support our students in trying to gather more diverse experiences in their training. So we tend to have a very linear path that we put our graduate students on of following a very particular curriculum that tends to, in some ways, limit their opportunities in terms of what they are exposed to. So if we make a commitment to encourage our students to not just attend the conferences that are in their own area, but, you know, have our psychology students go to behavioral economics conference, have people go to conferences in other areas, start to make connections and start to do more of that networking, get exposure to different ideas, different ways of communicating ideas. I think that can also play a role. You know, when I went on the job market, I was told to hide my work on my CV that was more applied in nature, to kind of bury it, because it would be frowned upon. And I think things are changing, but I think there's a lot we can do in our mentorship roles to try to give people more opportunities to get exposure and to really prize that. So, you know, bringing in lots of speakers who are more diverse, who are working on policy issues, you know, not just having our usual types of talks at social lunch or whatever it is for people. We got to create the opportunities for people to meet people who are doing that work. It's not a talk amongst yourselves kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think it's a process that develops over time. Obviously, you want your students to develop expertise in theory, and developing theory and testing theory. And then, you know, only at that point, I think, are they in a good position to be able to apply that theory in a smart way. And in the meantime, they can read the work that's being done, go to the conferences, study the areas, as Richard says, that they're passionate about, and view it as a process that maybe evolves over the early part of a career.
Let me say that I find the discussion surprisingly unrealistic. This is Norbert Schwartz.
Norbert?
That's Norbert.
It sounds like Norbert.
Yeah, this is Norbert, yeah.
Both
I mean, I'm sitting here and I say, gee, yeah, I mean, good luck to the student. And having spent a good part of my career in some interdisciplinary social science environment, I think we have to recognize that different fields use different criteria for what a career looks like and what gives you access to it. As long as psychology or social psychology assumes that the entry ticket are what? At least 5 publications for a good job, then the kind of stuff where you sit around, do field experiments forever, wait for years, and are then told at the publication stage that unfortunately you can't draw any damn causal conclusion is just unrealistic. What is more realistic is probably that there is a different type of career path, more applied positions for which students actually have a different profile and that we accept as a reasonable career path. Most programs I have been affiliated with consider a student who goes into applied jobs actually a failure, because they're not generating much new knowledge and you can't see them again on academic conferences and they have no citation impact. In fact, having directed a training grant for a while, a major criterion for the success of your training grant is 10 years out, the impact of your trainees. Not that they got a really nice job in some city agency where they are now helping the urban planners get something right. So this is not an issue of kind of learning a new trick on how to analyze the stuff or doing your field experiments better. That's a very different idea about what psychological knowledge is good for, what we consider attractive for our graduate students, what the graduate students consider attractive, and what the career opportunities look like. So if I had to think about how to do this, I would think about how to find a way into creating positions in policy schools, which are not terribly research-oriented, which do not require you to have 5 papers, which require you to have a reasonable storyline and some insight into something that may actually reward that. But I think we need to think about different pathways, because I actually cannot see myself recommending to any student to do that kind of thing, because I know that the student I'm working with will need to be productive, meaning publishing papers in good journals on a short timeline, and none of this work is suitable for that.
Can whoever's in charge, can we get the house lights up so we can, well,
identify?
I doubt it.
Have more of a conversation. Is it possible to change the
Anyway, I mean, here's what I would say. There's a lot of wisdom in what Norbert said, but, you know, as we economists would say, it's endogenous. So you guys have created the system that a graduate student has to have 5 publications. Thank you.
Yeah.
To get a job as a postdoc. My colleagues in the room know that I've rejected many applications because they have too many papers. Now they ignore me, but I just give them low ratings. But you're right. If the standards are the same, then no psychologists will go down this path, and the world will be a lot worse off. By the way, you're wrong about public policy schools. They're rapidly improving. They are, and the ones at major research universities like Harvard, Princeton, Chicago, Berkeley, they are interested in hiring behavioral scientists.
Yep.
And
UCLA just interviewed a few social psychologists in the last cycle. Increasingly, absolutely.
So, where is it written that you have to write 5 bad papers to get a job as a postdoc? One good one, I would hire that person.
Yes, please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Ian Hansen. I want to thank you for having this topic, which I think is really germane and important. And I also really appreciate the sentiment of encouraging people to do politically relevant research without shame. And my question is really with regard to the idea of doing work in support of some kind of government program. I think of the government as being a kind of bifurcated thing. There's sort of the government A and there's the government B. And the government A is the government we'd all like to support, and I think it's the government that you sort of given examples of ways to support in your talks. And that's the government that's democratically accountable, and we can vote them in and we can vote them out, and therefore they tend to be responsive to the needs of people, and they do things like protect our environment, provide schooling and education and good health and welfare policies. But then there's also the government B, which tortures people and indefinitely detains people and assassinates people without charge or trial or legal justification, and persecutes whistleblowers, et cetera, et cetera. And so the question is, how can we as social psychologists be of service to government A without that spilling over to service to government B? For instance, with regard to the nudge, I'm quite sympathetic to the idea of nudging people towards compliance with things that are going to be in good service to the health and welfare of the country. I don't want to nudge people towards government B's agenda. And maybe is there anything we can do aside from a nudge that increases people's domain of free will and choice, where we can trust people to make good choices once they actually have that awareness and consciousness of what they're doing?
I mean, my answer to that would be, you're not talking to the president. If you want to affect policy, you're talking to congressional staff members and career bureaucrats, and these are people who, you know, I've met hundreds of them, and 99% of them are well-meaning civil servants who would like nothing better than to figure out a way to give more people student loans and make it easier for them to qualify for the student loans. Don't think about this as like, you know, the big picture. Think of it as, you know, can we solve some small problem?
And I think we have to separate out the policy ends from the policy means, which is to say that, you know, I'm not sure it's our role to decide what the policy agenda should be, except in special circumstances where the policy really relates to what psychologists know something about, like mental health, let's say. I think all we're trying to do is improve the effectiveness of programs that other people have decided are priorities, or that we agree are shared priorities, like getting people to save more for retirement. You know, beyond that, yeah, I mean, any of these tools can be used for good or ill. Richard, when he signs his book to people, always signs it "nudge for good," trying to promote people to use his tools for good. But you know, obviously, we can't stop people from using them.
That's a hope.
As they're going to use them.
Yes.
And it's also the case, I think, that you know, I think part of your question ties to what about unintended consequences of different interventions that people try or different policies that people implement. And part of that is of course an issue to consider, but that's where really, really rigorous ongoing outcome monitoring becomes incredibly important. So it's not that, you know, you implement a policy and walk away. You're constantly doing it in an iterative fashion and looking at how to have things be more effective and trying to catch those issues that are not going as well. So I think it's less of a one-time application. I mean, the examples that you talked about show all kinds of changes over time of how these policies are being implemented. Except when 35 memos it takes to try to change a number.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next.
Our next question.
Hi, I'm Jen Lerner, and I'm a professor, hi everyone, at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where we now have 3 psychologists, and we're eager to hire more. This has been a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for doing it. I wanted to ask you, you talked about how some of the constraints have to do with the tenure, traditional criteria, and the way departments are organized. But I think another big constraint to getting more interdisciplinary collaboration in working on policy problems is funding. So grant proposals for the National Institutes of Health, for National Science Foundation are within discipline. And a psychologist who really wants to continue contributing to theory and also contribute to policy can continue to do that if they can be a member of a team. Right. And so how do we try to change funding systems so that they specifically call for teams to work in a kind of congregation of domain-specific experts? Any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, some of these behavioral insight teams that are popping up have funding.
Right.
And typically the funding will come from the agency. So, you know, like the first project we worked on in the UK was trying to collect from tax deadbeats faster. And they were sending out letters. They were happy to send out better letters. It didn't cost them anything. And so you didn't really need any. And this was a project that made money. So the costs were analyzing the data. if you can find some government agency that's willing to try something different, then you can often get it in. And
thanks to the executive order, there are an increasing number of them that are open to doing that.
There are people like Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates that are willing to throw lots of money at this. The Gates Foundation, which their biggest problem is that they can't spend all the money, is very interested in these problems.
And I think if you look at a lot of the private foundations that are putting calls out, I mean, 2 grants that our lab has recently, we had to write big sections on how our work was interdisciplinary in order to get the grant. So I think there's a shift that may be happening of that becoming more and more common is actually really something that's being valued. And hopefully it's continuing to change.
It may be just looking for different.
Yeah, it's not in the federal agencies.
Yeah, look at some of the private foundations, because I think you're going to see it more strongly there. Because interdisciplinary is kind of a big buzzword in a lot of the grants, I think, now.
Because they're trying to achieve a particular content-oriented outcome. Okay, thank you. One more question, and then we'll break and go to the reception.
Okay, great.
Your name is?
Wendy, thanks. Lynn Miller at the University of Southern California. And, listening to some of the comments, and certainly Norbert's is what I could hear from the back of the room, what I imagined he said. But is this concern with these incentive structures at the beginning of people's careers. And it occurred to me that maybe we're barking up the wrong part of the tree. Maybe we should be thinking about incentive structures after people get tenure. Yeah. So a lot of these pressures are off, and maybe we just have to create incentive structures for like a level 2 professor or something like this, where professors are contributing to the world in terms of applications or in terms of policy or in terms of other sorts of things, and engaging more in the world. And maybe, there would be more possibilities for thinking about those incentive structures at that end of our careers.
Yeah,
I think that's right. I think we need to start thinking more broadly about what impact means. We're so focused on ISI, we should be more focused on social impact.
Yeah.
And I think that Norbert is right that we'd be irresponsible to send our students who we think have brilliant theoretical minds down the path of chasing some field tests that are going to unfold uncertainly over a long period of time if that's the only thing we're putting them into. This may be something for later in the career when they're more secure. And we need to acknowledge also that some of our students might be best served by taking one of these jobs in a policy school, in a business school, dare I say, in a for-profit organization that's interested in applying behavioral science. And that's one way of extending our impact. It doesn't necessarily have to be creating many clones of ourselves.
Yeah, I'd like to see Norbert take this up. I think you've already got tenure, don't you?
All right, thank you very much. This was a wonderful contribution. All right, on to continue celebrating.